our great favourite Miss Austen is my countrywoman, with whom Mamma before her marriage was acquainted. Mamma says that she was then the prettiest, silliest, most affected husband-hunting butterfly she ever remembers. Now, who would dare cast such a dispersion on Jane Austen herself? Well, the answer is her contemporary, the writer Mary Russell Mitford. Now, I first came across Mitford not through my work on the 18th century, but by rooting through a charity shop, bookshop, and I came across this beautiful folio edition of her most famous, arguably, her most famous work, Our Village, which was first of all a collection of essays published in the Ladies' Magazine, a popular periodical at the time that featured the work of lots of women writers, particularly those who wanted to remain anonymous. The Ladies' Magazine was aimed at women, and it was published monthly between 1770 and 1847. It cost just a few pence and featured articles on fiction, fashion, music, social gossip and poetry. These were a selection of essays written by Mitford that reflected the life, the times, some of the characters that she came across in the village that she lived in rural southern England. And in the 1830s, these were made into multi-volume books that you could buy. And remarkably, when I was in Mitford's birthplace, New Alresford in Hampshire, I actually came across, in a bookstore, in the town that she was born in, the village really that she was born in, I came across one of the original 1830s volumes. And as you can see, it's in pretty bad condition. The boards are sort of falling apart and someone's stuck on a little sticker, which I don't want to peel off, so I've been holding it in place. But it really got me into these works, and I've been flicking through. You'll be pleased to hear the folio version, and I rarely open this original first edition just because I'm so terrified of damaging it, although it is absolutely beautiful, and it has these really incredible, beautiful end papers as well, which are lovely. But yeah, the board is coming off. And what I found with this collection is that it gives the most remarkable insight into rural life at the time, yes, but also that Mitford writes in this really Austen-esque, Austen-adjacent way. She has the incredible human observation that Austen does, and she's really, really funny. So who was Mary Mitford? She's born in 1787, and she's roughly a contemporary of Jane Austen. They live in the same part of the world, in Hampshire to begin with, where of course Austen famously has her family cottage at Chawton, and where she writes all of her novels. And Mitford is 12 years younger than Jane and moves in similar circles, at least to begin with, but Mitford's life is, I think, worthy, frankly, of an Austen novel itself. She has these incredible ups and downs, these rises of fortune and these terrible falls, and it is by her pen, a lot like Austen, that she survives, that she makes her money and finds her voice in the world. Mitford is arguably born into more privilege and more security than Jane Austen is. She's the daughter of a gentleman's daughter, a woman who has standing and respectability in her community. Her father is a doctor. He's not local. He comes into the region, he falls in love with this gentleman's daughter, and they marry. Sounds like a perfect Austen plot, but there are problems along the way, and unlike a Jane Austen novel where we finish with a wedding, Mary Mitford's story and the story of her family continues well beyond that. Her father has a terrible gambling addiction, and within a few years in Mary's childhood, he has gambled away the entire family fortune. All the money is gone. They're forced to leave the house, the big house that they live in, and instead they have to go and live in various places along the south coast of England in distinctly less salubrious settings. Remarkably, and this is what always gets me about Mary's story, I find this almost incomprehensible. Her father buys a lottery ticket in 1797 when Mary is just 10 years old. This is an early lottery, an early form of the lottery that we know and love today. And incredibly, he wins. He wins £20,000, a fortune, back to his family. They are now secure again, and Mary's childhood that has been spent moving around with no assurity after this great social outcasting and this downfall that she's had to go through along with her mother, they are now back where they started. They have restored their respectability, but inevitably the gambling addiction continues, and Mary Mitford's father gambles all of the lottery money right away. And so it falls to Mary as she grows up to make her way in the world and to bring in income that her family can use. She starts to write poetry, and soon she's writing plays. She writes drama for the stage in London, and she enjoys some success. She makes some money at this. But today it is her essays, her Our Village collection, that we know her for. So let's dive in to some of those stories and to really hear her voice. Brilliant things about these essays is that we get these portraits of real people living and working around the village that Mary is living in when she writes. And these are not just the people of the social class that she was born into, but instead we get glimpses of people working in the fields, people working in cottage industries, people working in the pub, travellers passing by on the road. We get people playing cricket. She famously, in this collection, talks about the beauty of the young men playing cricket. And in fact, Mary is not one to shy away from writing about sex and what she thinks of these men. It's not in explicit terms, but we might read it as slightly more voyeuristic, aesthetically appreciative than Austen herself. We get these amazing characters. For example, we get a farmer called Farmer Shaw, who is a sort of miserly, fearsome figure in the landscape. But then we get his wife, who Mary tells us is completely different. His wife, she writes, is not a little like her husband, a laughing, bustling, good-humoured woman, famous for the rearing of turkeys and the fattening of calves, ruling the servants and children within doors with as absolute a discretion as that with which he, Mr. Shaw, sways the outdoor sceptre, and complaining occasionally of the power she likes so well. We get children and teenagers. Here we have a 12-year-old girl described by Mary as short and stunted in her figure, thin in face, sharp in feature, with a muddled complexion, wild sunburnt hair, and eyes whose very brightness had in them something startling, over-informed, super subtle, too clever for her age. We also get a glimpse of a landscape and an architectural vista that no longer exists for us today in the same way. She writes about not only the big houses in the neighbourhood that she visits, that she's aware of, but also some of the poorest cottages. And sometimes she writes about them in very picturesque terms, and we can hear her voice as someone of the higher ranks of society coming through here. And she tends a little bit to, let's say, prettify the truth, the reality of these lives. But nonetheless, we get a glimpse behind the doors of cottages, homes, taverns, pubs, places where Austen most often fails to take us. One of the prettiest rustic dwellings in our pretty neighbourhood is the picturesque farmhouse which stands on the edge of Wokefield Common, so completely in a bottom that the passengers who traverse the high road see indeed the smoke from the chimneys floating like a vapour over the woody hill which forms the background. What a piece of fairy land! The tall elms overhead just bustling into tender vivid leaf, with here and there a hoary oak or a silver-barked twig swelling with the brown buds, and yet not quite stripped of the tawny foliage of autumn. But it's not just twee visions of the landscape or cutesy children running around that Mary gives us. She also gives us real human tension. We get a sense in the village essays of a community in change, a community in flux, a place where people come and go, where fortunes are made and lost, and there's a whole world contained within this small world that she lives and writes in. So amazing to see a woman who's had all of her power stripped from her, her social standing, the standing of her family, of her parents, writing in this way and interacting with people not just from her own social class but across the spectrum. And I think that's what makes Mary Mitford, for me, so special, that she's someone who has lived in the big house on the hill but also the pauper's cottage. Remarkably, her father seems to have remained a figure of affection in her life. She writes really fondly of him, and in all of her letters, in her writing, she paints him as a really quite tragic figure and someone who she wanted to support. And writing was her way of doing that. It was her way of navigating the world and really building a life that she wanted for herself.